In unbearably cold winter conditions, American troops proved their mettle. On December 14, 1944, American soldiers stationed in the Belgian-German border town of Bastogne were in a great festive mood. Hollywood star Marlene Dietrich was in town on the USO tour, singing to a crowd of newcomers and war-weary grunts at much-needed R&R. 6 months had passed since the D-Day invasion of Normandy, and the Allies had reason to celebrate. The Americans and the British drove the Nazis out of France, and the Russian army was rapidly approaching from the east. The surrender of the German threat was in sight. But this is not how Adolf Hitler saw it. The Nazi leader, paranoid and agitated after the failed assassination attempt by the conspirators, Operation Valkyrie, believed that Germany had one last chance to strike at the heart of the Allies in the West. Hitler ordered his commanders to prepare for a full-scale offensive against a strategic weak point in the Allied line, located in the heavily forested area known as the Ardennes. Hitler's final gamble would have resulted in the largest ground battle in American military history and would have claimed tens of thousands of lives on both sides. But in the month-long battle known as the Battle of the Bulge, the Americans proved their mettle in cold winter conditions to seal the fate of the Nazis forever. The Nazi front line gave its name to the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge was the Allied name for a major German offensive that the Nazis called Wacht am Rhein, or Watch on the Rhine. More than 1 million Allied and German soldiers fought in the Battle of the Bulge, nicknamed after the bulge to the west formed on the Allied lines after Nazi tanks and infantry temporarily overran the area during Hitler's surprise attack. The Allies were really unprepared for the German onslaught, says Martin Kane, World War II historian and author of 8 books on the Battle of the Bulge. The Ardennes region was known to American soldiers as the honeymoon sector, a remote section of the Allied front line where newcomers could ease their task, and battle-weary veterans could recuperate and prepare for battle. Allied commanders dismissed information from British Ultira codebreakers that large numbers of German troops and equipment were being withdrawn from combat with Russia and stockpiled on the Western Front. The assumption, which soon turned out to be wrong, was that the Nazis were simply preparing their defenses for the coming Allied advance on Germany. No one thought that Hitler would dare to strike back with the German army, already destroyed by months of fierce fighting on 2 fronts. Hitler's plan was to break through the weak link in the Ardennes and then move northeast to capture the Belgian port city of Antwerp. Without Antwerp, it would have been difficult for the Allies to resupply for their final advance on Berlin. By securing this strategic position, Hitler believed he could negotiate terms with the Allies and avoid unconditional surrender, allowing him to continue the war with Russia in the east. Hitler counted on the cold to defeat the Allies. In addition, by attacking through the Ardennes in winter, Hitler was betting that bad weather would cut off Allied air support. The Ardennes are notoriously foggy during December, making it impossible for bombers and resupply planes to hit their targets. So, on the morning of December 16, as thick fog shrouded the mountainous Ardennes forest, a German battle group of 200,000 men and 1,000 tanks launched a full-scale attack on the unsuspecting Allies. In Kane's interviews with dozens of Battle of the Bulge veterans, they describe eerie red and purple lights shooting through a mist of pea soup, followed by the chilling sound of Mimi howling, Nebelwerfer rockets, and ground-shaking explosions in all directions. 2 regiments of the 106th were quickly surrounded by German infantry, resulting in the largest field surrender of Allied forces in World War II. Over 6,800 American soldiers of the 422nd and 423rd Regiments are taken prisoner. Elsewhere, near the Belgian city of Normandy, 84 American prisoners of war were killed without delay by German SS troops in the largest mass execution of the entire war. Just 24 hours after the first bombardment, German tanks broke through the weakly defended center of the Ardennes region and rolled west towards the Meuse River, creating the infamous bulge in the Allied line that gave the battle its peculiar name. Using weather and intelligence data to their advantage, the Nazi offensive seemed to be working. But if Hitler thought that the few Americans would lie down and let the German tanks roll all the way to Antwerp, he was wrong. After the initial confusion and chaos of the Nazi surprise attack, the American soldiers regrouped and, relying on old-fashioned ingenuity, held off the German advance until reinforcements arrived. The ability of U.S. troops to improvise saved the day. The Americans had an incredible ability to improvise, think on the fly, and act autonomously down to the squad level. The Germans could not operate below the regimental level without written orders. General James Gavin of the 82nd Airborne Division, already a hero in Normandy and Operation Market Garden, flashed again defending the strategically important Belgian city of Streetwitz. He jumped into his jeep, spying on the enemy positions, and divided his men into squads to hunt down the Nazis, using the terrain to his advantage. The combatant 30th Regiment, nicknamed Roosevelt's SS, used similar guerrilla tactics to halt the German army's northward advance. The engineers of the 30th Regiment were phenomenal. They blew up everything. There is a city called Trois Ponts because of the 3 bridges over the river Amblève. Not after the engineers were there. Albert Tarbell was a full-blooded Mohawk from the 82nd Airborne Division who was the best scout you could have, King says, as you stand knee-deep in snow and hunt the enemy in the woods. Nazi commanders thought their soldiers were hallucinating when they swore they were being fired upon by Indians. Give up? Nuts. But perhaps the most famous battle in the Bulge took place in Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division was pinned down and surrounded by Nazi infantry for 5 long days. The Americans dug trenches along a wide perimeter around Bastogne and relied on the locals for warm clothing and rations. Temperatures dropped to minus 20 degrees Celsius, minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit, and soldiers who did not die of hypothermia were crippled by frostbite and trench foot. When the medics ran out of supplies, life-saving amputations had to be carried out with kitchen knives and cognac as the only anesthetic. When the situation of the Americans began to deteriorate, the Nazi field commander officially announced the surrender. Gen. Anthony McAuliffe of the 101st Airborne responded with one of the most famous backlashes in the history of warfare, nutty. The 101st Airborne Division held out long enough for the skies to clear and the first supplies to arrive from Allied bombers. Within days, General George Patton turned his army of 350,000 north and broke through the German flank to relieve the beleaguered 101st Airborne Division and turn the tide of the Battle of the Bulge. By January 13, 1945, the Allies had completely repulsed the German attack and smoothed out the salient on the Western Front. But the Allied forces, especially the Americans, paid a high price for their victory in the Battle of the Bulge. A total of 19,000 American soldiers died, 47,500 were injured, many due to brutal conditions, and more than 23,000 were missing. It is estimated that over 100,000 German soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing in action in Hitler's ill-fated last venture.